This is probably the biggest challenge that a lot of self-recording bands and artists have, is that you are the songwriter, musician, and engineer in one person, which is a real challenge because you're not as objective. You don't have like a team of specialists.
But also how exciting that now we can finally do that. I think it would have been a lot harder to run a tape machine and also play the guitar at the same time, right? So we're pretty lucky, we're fortunate. Just keep getting it.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedikt Hein. I'm a mixing engineer running a studio called Outback Recordings, where we mix about 200 to 250 songs per year for artists from all over the world, many of them self-recording. So over the years, we've helped a lot of people improve their recordings so that we can do a better job mixing. And all those insights and all the things we've learned from that, we are sharing on this platform and this podcast and our coaching and everything we offer at the selfrecordingband.com. So welcome. If you're discovering this on YouTube, please know that this is primarily a podcast, so you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you enjoy podcasts. And if you discover this on the podcast app and you prefer watching your content, please go to YouTube, find the Self-Recording Band, and watch the episodes there. All right, so if you want to make better recordings yourself, you are in the right place. And today's episode is something we've never done before on the show, actually, because this one is a recording of a talk that we did at Studioszene 2024 in Hamburg. Studioszene is a nice event where people from the audio industry from all over the world come together. There is all of these manufacturers with their booths, so it's kind of a trade show, but then there's also masterclasses and talks, and it's a big networking event. And we were part of this show for the last 2 times that it happened. We've done live podcasts there, some of which we published on this show. And we've also done talks this time on stage. And this one is one of those talks. It's about getting it right at the source. So it will help you record better source tracks before you even worry about mixing and everything that comes after that. It's very, very important. It always starts with the source. The song always comes first, then the playing, of course, and all that. But then capturing it at the source with the right mic positioning, right mic placement, mic choice, getting the room to work, setting up the instruments, all that stuff is next. And this is much more important than many people think. It is important if you want to record something that you can mix easily later, so you don't have to fight your recordings. Yeah, this talk is all about it. It's called Get It Right at the Source. And my friend and co-host Malcolm Owen Flood and I did that live on stage in Hamburg. Enjoy.
Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to this talk, this presentation, workshop. My name is Benedikt Hein. I'm a professional mixing engineer, music producer. Been doing that for 12, 13 years full time now. I run a studio called Outback Recordings in Bavaria. We mix a lot of songs each year, about 200, 250 songs per year. And a lot of them, like not all of them are very well produced because some of them are self-produced by the artist. So over time we had to learn how to solve a couple of very common problems and help the artists get better recordings at the source so that we could do a good job mixing. And that became a big part of our job. And that turned into what we now do at the Self-Recording Band. And I do that with my buddy Malcolm Owen Flood from Canada.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be here.
He's also a great engineer, great mixing engineer, producer. And we have a podcast together and we help artists all over the world make better, more exciting recordings from their jam spaces. And today we're going to talk about getting it right at the source, which is exactly what we do most of the time with these people. And the thing is, before we start, I want to ask who here is primarily mixing and recording their own music? All right. And the rest more for like working for others as engineers, producers, studio owners? Not? All right.
All right, I'm curious. What are you doing?
Hobbyist? All right.
Hobbyist, that's cool too.
Fair enough, fair enough, cool. Yeah, just the hobbyist. Yeah, so just so we know like what we should focus on. Because that stuff is relevant regardless of that. Like if you're working with other artists, it's relevant because they need to record great tracks that you can then mix or produce with them. And if it's your own music, you should be your future self's best friend and just do whatever you can at the source so that you then don't fight your own tracks in the mixing process. So this is relevant for everyone. We broke this down into 6 steps, and I'm going to go quickly over them. We don't have that much time, so part of it will be quick. We've got some audio examples as well, but we'll go through some of the stuff rather quickly. So we have the song, the arrangement, and the playing technique as a first step that needs to be right. And we'll go into each of these points later. I'm just going to give you the overview. Then we need the right gear for the job. Not necessarily the most high-end fancy gear, but whatever is right for the job. Then we do pre-production, which is a part that a lot of people often skip. They go straight from writing to production to mixing and skip that whole pre-pro process. So we're going to talk about that. Then it's about the actual recording setup, of course. So the room plays a role, instrument setup, mic placement, all those things. That's the part that most people probably have in mind when they think about getting it right at the source. It's the obvious part, but everything else is just as important. Then there's the actual recording session, where it's a lot about communicating with the artist, coaching them, guiding them, getting the best possible takes out of the artist, or yourself if it's your music, because at the end of the day, you can fix a lot of the tech problems, but you can't fix a recording that is that just doesn't feel good, that has no emotion, that has no energy. So that is really important. And then number 6 is the whole, like, before you go to the editing and mixing process, like comping and consolidating your takes, labeling them correctly, doing some basic editing, maybe on the fly while you're recording, and then just setting yourself up for success in the mix. So these are the 6 points that we're going to go through. And let's start with the first one: song arrangement and playing technique. So it all starts with the sound in your head, the vision. And I think, Malcolm, this is probably the biggest challenge that a lot of self-recording bands and artists have, is that you are the songwriter, musician, and engineer in one person, which is a real challenge because you're not as objective. You don't have like a team of specialists. And so that is, I think, the biggest challenge when it comes to DIY recording. Malcolm, what are your thoughts on this one?
Definitely the biggest challenge, but also how exciting that now we can finally do that. I think it would have been a lot harder to run a tape machine and also play the guitar at the same time, right? So we're pretty lucky, we're fortunate. Just keep getting it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but just keep that in mind, because what that means is that a lot of people kind of skip important steps here or cut corners, because it's way easier to do all of these jobs well if it's different people who are specialized in that. If you have to do all of that, you might cut corners in some department, and it's like important to not do that. It will take longer and all that, but it's important to take all these roles seriously and accept the fact that you got 5 jobs to do or more when you do it yourself. All right, so songwriting and arrangement. Of course, the song is what matters most. At the end of the day, it's about the music, the song, and the art. And we often forget that because we love the tech, we love the nerdy stuff, but it's only about the music at the end. All those things are just tools. So what should happen is this following chain, and like this is a crazy good visualization that I came up with. Watch out. So here we go. So it comes out of the speakers, you hear something, you process it in your brain, and then ideally you will get some kind of reaction, right? So that is what we want, right? And it's only that matters. Like how you get there doesn't matter, but it's like something comes out of the speakers, we feel something, there's a reaction to it, people fall in love with the music and are fascinated by it. And whatever we can do to make that happen, we will do. And it starts at the source. You can't just create that in the mix if it's not there from the beginning. All right, playing technique. Malcolm, can you think of some common examples where that could go wrong? And I'm not saying like that you obviously hear mistakes, like how can that go wrong sonically? So when someone doesn't have like the playing skills down, or they're just not an experienced enough musician maybe, or they never played in the studio, which could be different from live, like what problems could be a result of that?
Yeah, I mean, the classic situation I can think of is you've got a rock mix, so there's drums and guitars, but there's also an acoustic guitar track. And that person doesn't use a pick. And so they use their thumb to strum a guitar in this really dense rock mix. You just can't, like, it's not gonna work. That's a technique problem, right? It's like you haven't learned to use a guitar pick. It won't work. You have to develop that technique of learn to play with a pick, right? It's just situational. There's a time where the thumb would have been the right choice, but not on this song, theoretically.
Yeah, totally. We got some examples here that I want to show you real quick. So the first one is about drums. It's the setup that you're about to hear is super, super simple. So you're hearing a drum kit in a room, and there is one microphone similar to that one, a dynamic SM58 on a stand a couple of feet away from the drums. The purpose of this exercise was to capture the performance and the internal balance of the kit. And then I played, and that's me drumming, like, excuse my not existing like drum skills in this example, but like I played the same kit twice with only a dynamic mic in front of it. And I wanted to show how different it sounds based on how I play. So the first one and the second one are very different. It's the same exact setup, no change on the preamp, no gain change, nothing fancy, same kit, everything's the same. I just played differently. So listen to that. Both are not really good, again, but it gets the point across. That's what it's all about. So here's the first one. And then I play the second one, and then you tell me what you hear and what the difference is, and just like how it sounds based on the playing. All right, so number 2.
Which one did we like more? Number two. Everybody's got number 2, right? Yeah.
All right. So yeah, nothing changed about the setup, just the way I played it. And so the main differences were, I think, the consistency in terms of timing a little bit and all that. But most importantly, what do you think was the biggest difference? Anyone? Yeah, exactly that. The power in the shells and the balance between the cymbals and the shells. So in the first one, it was the cymbal mess and like barely hitting the shells. And like in the second one, you had a balanced kit. It's not like perfectly recorded, but even with that one mic, you could hear a kick drum, you could hear a snare drum, there was punch, you could hear toms. There was a balance between the hi-hats, the crashes, and the shells. And so imagine now miking up that kit properly and you have a pair of overheads over it. You would get, with the second example, you would get a pretty good representation of the kit in stereo just from the overheads, and then you can blend in close mics. And also in the close mics, you would have less bleed because the individual shells are just louder, and so the bleed from the cymbals wouldn't come up as much. And like so many advantages to when it comes to mixing this, compared to the first example, where in every mic all you would hear is basically cymbals, especially if you compress it and then add high end and all that. So that was a very common example, and that happens so often when people send us tracks to mix because they don't realize that how you play it kind of dictates what you can do later in the mix, more so than changing anything about the tech setup. It makes a way bigger difference doing that than swapping out a microphone. So example number 2, 2 guitar takes. So there's one very obvious difference, and then there's another one that is a problem in both recordings, so bonus points if anyone can pick up that second one. Let's start. I'm going to turn it down a little bit. I don't know how loud it is. So what is the difference between 1 and 2?
The second one has more muddy low end.
Sorry?
The second one has more muddy low end.
Yeah, and in terms of playing, like what's the difference between the two?
Oh, he's damping more. That's what
Yeah, you could call it that. Yeah. Anyone picked up what the actual difference was in the technique? I think the first one was downstrokes, like all downstrokes, and the second one was doing up and down, which is kind of sloppy, sometimes from the top, sometimes from the bottom, and you don't have these accurate attacks, and it just sounds way more sloppy.
Got flubby.
Flubby, yeah. So bonus point, like for whoever catches the one that's like pretty wrong with both of those examples, which is also very common at the source problem. Was there something weird about both of them?
I don't know. Comfort.
Sorry?
I don't know. Maybe I've heard some comfort filtering or something like that.
Could be the case, but could be. I would have to check. But the more obvious thing is, Malcolm, what did you hear?
They're out of tune.
They're out of tune.
But
Both of them.
That's
Yeah.
just guitars usually, isn't it? They're always out of tune. But that one was particularly out of tune, problematically.
Yeah, exactly. And so many people don't catch that. It's a skill to be able to learn to hear that. And one guitar on its own is not that problematic. But if you add a double to this, and then maybe harmonies and other layers, it gets messy real quick if things are not in tune. And so both of them had this problem, and a session full of tracks like that would be very problematic.
Yeah. Now, if either of those examples, what's worth pointing out and why we are starting with this kind of stuff, technique, is that if you took those players, if we took Benny to Abbey Roads and he played like that first example, it would make no difference compared to if he recorded that in his bedroom. Like it would be bad either way.
Yeah,
so it's
I would probably get a more pristine recording of my shitty performance.
Yeah, it would sound even worse. It'd be really obviously bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. Okay, so next step, we're gonna move a little more quick now. Next step is the gear, and then we get to some other audio examples again later when it comes to mics. So the gear is really, in general, not as important as people think it is. I mean, we're here at an event full of like cool gear and we all love it. But at the end of the day, the songs and how you play them and where you put the mics and how you use the gear is always more important than the gear itself. I'm just going to show you real quick a hierarchy that I came sort of up with that shows you what I think, or what most people would agree, I think, is more important and what is less important. So at the top here is instruments, again, at the source. The most expensive mic and all of that doesn't matter if it's just the wrong guitar for the job or the entirely wrong sizes of drum shells or cymbals or whatever. So pick whatever is right. And if you have a limited budget and you can only invest in certain things, start there. Like I would rather have cheaper mics. You can do a lot with just 57s and the cheap interface if you have a really great instrument and a song that's played well versus the other way around. So instruments, strings, drum heads, picks, sticks. People don't underestimate how important that stuff is. You know, a lot of the sound is in the strings and the drum heads. Then the next step is if you're recording guitars, amps and cabs, where cabs are more important than amps most of the time. So if you have the same amp and you swap out speaker cabinets, drastic difference. If you use the same cabinet and you have different amps of the same category, not as much of a difference. People underestimate that a lot. Like it's totally different between different guitar cabs. Then the room is important, of course. If it's a really crappy room and you record with microphones, do something about that. Then you got to be able to obviously form an opinion on what you're actually doing, and you have to be able to hear it properly. So your monitors and headphones are super important. You could argue that's more important than the rest maybe, but it's definitely important. It's not the recording chain directly, but you got to know what you're doing. Then it's mics and DIs. So maybe you don't need a DI box, maybe your interface has a good one, but not all of them are really good. So it's worth experimenting with that. If you feel like your DI recordings, if you do that, are a little dull, for example, try a better DI box with a higher impedance and see if that makes a difference. There are some DI boxes out there, especially passive ones, that just don't have a high enough impedance, period. Like there are a lot of them out there that will immediately compromise your guitar sound. Doesn't matter as much with active pickups. The other way around, sorry. Active pickups and passive is not a problem, but passive pickups with an active DI box, that's where the problem is. A lot of the active DI boxes don't have a high enough impedance. That's the correct way. And so yeah, if your guitar sounds dull, try that. Then the interface is the last tier. And it's funny because a lot of people, that's where they start. They buy an interface because it's kind of the heart of the studio. But honestly, most interfaces these days have good preamps, good converters, are kind of stable. They're not all the same, of course, but if everything else is right and you have some modern interface, it will work. If everything else is not right and you have the best interface, it won't work. So that's just the hierarchy here.
Just worth mentioning that compressors and any hardware gear of any kind is just not on that list. It's something that we all want to have, but when you're getting started, it's like work through this priority.
Yeah.
And of course, above instruments is the player, the very top of the list.
Yes.
The instrumentalists themselves.
Absolutely correct. And again, we're here at an event with a lot of really great gear. I love that. Did a talk yesterday with guys from Malaysia. Great stuff, and I love that stuff. But if before I would buy that, I would get all of that right and then go there. And I do love it, but only if that stuff works. Okay, unless, the one exception is if whatever you're getting is essential for the sound you want to create. Like if you have to have something because you need to distort something because that's the sound, then you obviously have to have some device that does that. But other than that, not as much. Cool. Pre-production, super important step of the process. The goal of this is, I always say to get yourself and the songs ready for the studio. So when you record your own stuff, people often don't think about this. When a band goes to a studio or hires a producer, they prepare, hopefully. So they prepare the songs, they do demos, they practice, and then they go to the studio. They don't just start the process at the studio. I mean, if you have the budget to do that, then that's perfect, but most people don't have that. So if you go to the studio unprepared, you're not necessarily doing yourself a favor. And if you record yourself, do that same kind of pre-pro process and just pretend you're going to the studio. You want to be prepared. You want to separate that from the actual process, because when you then record, you want to focus on capturing a magic moment and the best possible takes. And you don't want to worry about which part was that actually and how did we play that, and like, you don't want any of that. You want to know the song, you want to know what you're doing, and then you can focus on the moment and do the best possible job performing it. So part of that is finding your sound and your workflow in this demo process, having a good monitoring and headphone mix, learning your room. I think, Malcolm, that's a huge luxury, again, when people are able to record in their own jam spaces, for example. You can do pre-pro in the same room that you actually do the record, which is a luxury. Like, if you go to a studio, you can't do that, like, you know, but there you can take all the time you need to get ready, to learn your room, to experiment, there's no pressure. And then when you do the actual recording session, you are really prepared and you know everything in that setup.
Yeah, you can find, your best little spot for a vocal mic, your best room mic spots. You can experiment with all of that without it costing you an hourly rate. It's pretty valuable.
Yeah, and artists pay a lot of money to do pre-pro at a studio with producers, and you can do that at your own studio if you do it yourself. So in this whole process, of course, record demos, analyze them, maybe get feedback from the outside because you're going to get too close to it working on your own songs. And then create a plan and practice. You just want to be ready for the actual session. You don't want to have to deal with those things when it's time to actually record. So don't really take this seriously. If you talk to any of the producers and mixers you're doing these masterclasses, anyone who's doing this professionally, they will tell you how important the pre-production process is and how important it is to be prepared, to practice, and to get that right. And in the DIY scenario, that's the first thing that goes out the window, basically. People write songs and then they go straight to recording them, instead of doing that first.
Sometimes at the same time, they're writing into their computer and then they use that as the album. But it's worth redoing that step.
Yeah, cool. So the actual recording setup. This is like the sound check. This is, imagine again, if it was a studio situation, you arrive at the studio, you do the actual sound check setup. You're prepared, the songs are great, you can play them, you did the pre-pro, there are demos, everyone knows what they're doing. Now it's time to pick the right mics, choose the right spots for those mics and all that. It all starts though with the instrument setup. So if the drum kit itself has old drum heads on it and everything's rattling and there's a squeaking pedal and the guitars don't have new strings on them and there are intonation problems and all of that, the rest of the stuff again doesn't matter. So that's the reason why in studios there are drum techs and guitar techs and people doing that. So, and it's not rocket science, you can learn that, but it's surprising how many drummers, especially drummers, sorry if you're a drummer, but how many drummers have no idea about drum tuning. It's really fascinating. I don't know if it's your same experience, but if you talk to guitar players, they're often very particular about their rig and their pedals, and they know everything about it, and it's like their thing. And then you talk to a drummer, and they're like, well, I guess these heads have been on for the past 3 years, and I know the cymbal is cracked, but that's just what I play, and I don't know how to tune it. I've been in that situation so often. Maybe you get a different experience, but it's often like that.
Yeah, it's a problem. I guess going back to that guitar example from earlier, if it wasn't set up correctly, there's no intonation set up, it will never be able to be in tune over multiple chords. So this is actually, we should move this earlier in this process. I think it should be very important.
Yeah, it doesn't matter as much for the demos, I think, right? For the pre-pro.
That's fair.
But also, it's probably, yeah, but you're right. It's probably too late if you arrive at the studio and then realize that the gear is crap. Yeah. But the setup and the tuning is important. Good. So, and by the way, instrument setup, setting up guitars. A lot of people take their guitars to the shop every single time. You don't have to necessarily do that. You can learn that stuff, and it's not that complicated. And we even have an entire course on that with a guitar tech, a famous guitar tech who did stuff for big time artists. Colin Britton is a producer who did Papa Roach and all kinds of major rock bands, and Diego did guitar setup for them. And we have a course with them. And if you take a course like that, or even if you just watch a few videos, you can do most of, if not all of the setup yourself. It's not that hard, and it doesn't cost a lot. And I'm just saying, you can learn it. Good. Mic selection and placement. Assuming the instruments are great in the room, now it's time to pick the right mics and put them in the right spots. We're gonna have some audio examples now. And if you hear those differences, you will notice how big of a difference it makes to put a mic in a different spot. And it's very hard to make that much difference just with processing later. So get it right at the source. Let's start with a kick drum. I think it's the first one. Let's see. All right, so 3 different spots, same exact kick drum, same exact mic. Did you hear the difference? It's a little hard to hear on these headphones, but like you did hear the difference, right? Completely different vibe.
The second one almost sounded like a different kick drum. I
Yeah.
was going to ask if it was the same drum.
Yeah, it is exactly the same drum. The first one was like somewhere in the, like right inside the hole or somewhere in the kick drum, but not close to the beater. The second one was outside of the kick drum against the resonant head. And the third one was close to the beater, which on these headphones made a little weird sound that I didn't have in mind, but like, I don't know. But you could hear the difference in terms of beater sound between the 3. And yeah, the second one had a different body as well, like, yeah, agreed. So next one, I'm not sure what the next one is. We'll see. All right, this one is a little harder to hear on the snare drum, especially in these headphones, but what was the main difference to you? Anyone? Or Malcolm, maybe you can say.
I mean, there was definitely some body changes and attack changes for sure. And then
Yeah.
that last example, I started really hearing that, like, there was kind of a tuning issue almost ringing out.
Yeah, totally. It's the structure of the overtones, not just the volume of them, but they're different. Like, it's the same drum hit within like a 1 minute time window, so it's the same tuning, but the structure and the harmonics are just completely different. And also the stick attack is different. Not as obvious as with the kick drum, but still something that's very hard to change after the fact. But because if you take any of these and just EQ it, the overtone basics, like structure, stays the same. You can make it bright or dark or whatever, but you cannot change the character of the drum as much. But with the mic position, you can change the entire character of the drum. So the next one's more obvious again. I'm going to turn it down because this could be annoying. Let's see. It's a very dramatic difference in this case. So everyone could hear that, right?
Nice riff.
Thanks. I don't think it was me though. I can't remember. It could be. But so both were like pretty high gain, you know, too much gain for that type of riff probably. But the point is, it's the same cap, the same guitar, the same player, same everything. The difference is the first one, the mic was like spot on in the center of the cone, the center of the speaker. The second one was at the edge of the speaker. And it's just like that much of a difference. And it's a completely different sound. And if you EQ that and make it brighter or darker, what happens is you change the relationship between the fundamental notes and the overtones. And if you move the mic, the sound itself is like the same, but it's like darker or brighter. But you know, in and of itself, it's the same. If I just put a shelf on that, it changes the internal balance of the instrument. And with the mic, not so much, but it's like drastic, and it's that much, right? And so even swapping out the mic in the same spot will not give you that drastic of difference compared to just moving the same mic. So if you have whatever mic you have and you find a good spot for it, you can get very far, and you don't necessarily have to add another more expensive mic or whatever. And only if you like really max that out, then it makes sense to swap it out or add a different one. But just with moving it, and then there's the angle as well, like you can do so much on a guitar cab. Same is true, by the way, for amp sims. If you are doing virtual amps and not real amps, there are mic and cab emulations where you can virtually move a mic. Works the same. So if you know those principles, you can do the same thing. And if you have IRs where it's like a fixed thing and you can't move it, just swap out the IRs and try different ones. They are drastically different. Like it's not even close. The same amp with different mic and cab setup or different IRs, drastically different results.
Yeah, essentially moving a mic a couple inches is going to get you further than any expensive EQ in the world will. Any digital EQ, any analog EQ, just can't perform those fundamental changes that a mic move that far can get you.
100%, yeah. So the next up is monitoring. So of course, it's part of the setup. I mentioned it before, but in this case, what I mean is when you do the actual sound check, make sure that everyone hears what they want to hear so that they can perform well. That's part of the sound check and it's super important. How you set up a monitor mix completely changes the performance. Like you can really manipulate in a good way, like, or a bad way. You can manipulate an artist by changing the headphone mix. You can make them sing louder or softer. You can make them intonate better. You can make them, all kinds of things, make them feel better or worse by just changing the monitor mix. So it's really, really important. Any tricks or quick things that we could mention?
Yeah. Anybody tried flipping the phase on the vocalist when they're recording them? Like somebody's singing and they can't hear themselves, and all you do is click the polarity button? It's amazing. It's just the headphones are out of phase with their own head or something, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, there we go. Thank you. What did you do? I clicked a button. You're good.
Yeah, it's totally true. Like if you listen to one signal on its own, flipping the phase is obviously not going to do anything, but while you're singing, it does it because you can be out of phase with yourself, like you said. And it's fascinating how that can work. Another one is we did a masterclass online with Ken Lewis, who's like, I think he has like 45 billion streams or something like that, and the Grammy and a bunch of #1s. He's worked with Alicia Keys and Eminem and Taylor Swift and all kinds of people. And he showed in that vocal mastery masterclass that we did, he just showed how extreme his compression settings on the vocal monitor mix were. Not that what he would record, but just for the monitoring. He would put a compressor on it just for the monitoring. And I do that same thing, but he did it in a very extreme way. And it made it so that no matter if you were this close or this far from the mic, or if you sing loud or quiet, the volume was basically almost always the same. And you could argue, why would you want that? But the thing is, he says that when people sing quieter with more like intimate emotion, and then they start belting, sometimes they are like shocked and get quiet because it gets so loud in the headphones, or they are not hearing themselves anymore when they get quiet, and they just get insecure. And if they always hear a consistent like volume and all the details in their voice, they just perform freely and are not worried about it. And it makes so much sense. And I've tried it, and it totally works. Like I sometimes completely overcompress vocals just for the headphones, because the artist always hears themselves. They're not shocked when it gets loud, and it's a trick that works really well.
Yeah, discovering how to get them to perform well is just like everything in getting that performance we talked about at the very beginning. If you want them to perform well, they need to be able to hear themselves well, and everybody's got different ways of pulling that off. You always hear the stories about people needing to record in the control room with the speakers instead of with headphones. And like, if you have to do that, you just got to figure out how to make that work.
Totally, which brings us to the next point here. Actually, a very good segue is the vibe of the session. Like people need to feel comfortable recording. Very like underrated, like underestimated. And if you have, like everyone's different. Some people don't care. Some people are like, I can record here and like put a mic here and like I don't care what's around me and I can perform. Other people need like a candle and a certain whatever time of day and a certain drink. Lava lamp, whatever it is. But like if that's important to them, then that matters, right? They need to, and it's all about also about what the song's about. Again, Ken Lewis, great example. You should watch that masterclass, by the way, if you haven't, because what he has, it's a crazy, extreme example, but it's great. He has this like huge white surface behind his his absorbers, basically this white surface behind his desk. It's like a 360 almost surrounding him, and he has a projector or like multiple projectors. And when someone is performing next to him in the control room, he would put whatever they want or whatever they inspires them on these absorbers, and the entire room is like full of it. And he would be like, and he showed that, which was really great. Like he would have like nature scenes or whatever the artist thinks is inspiring, and they would be just immersed in that. And he says like the difference is night and day in terms of performance, right? So he just creates that really cool environment for everyone.
It's a cool idea.
Yeah.
Really cool idea.
Yeah. All right. Have checklists. It's like something not really exciting, but if you do things over and over and over again in every session, why not make it easy for yourself? Put that on a checklist and then don't ever think about it again. There's decision-making fatigue. We mentioned that yesterday in our mixing workshop as well. You can only make so many decisions a day, and you want to limit the amount of decisions you have to make as much as possible, because then you can focus on what really matters. And it's not worth wasting any brain power on things that are always exactly the same and don't really matter. So just make sure that sample rate, which kind of adapters you need, which cables, like the boring stuff that just needs to happen. All right, and then backups. You never want to lose a session, of course. So please do that. And you would be surprised how many people completely skip that. And it's cheap and easy to do it. Hack, if you haven't done that before, if you have a Dropbox account, you can just record, you can just put your sessions inside of that Dropbox folder on your computer and record there, and it will automatically upload in the background, which is a backup. So it works like a file on your computer. It doesn't change anything other than in the background, it constantly uploads and it lives in your Dropbox. You don't have to do anything to have that instant backup. And then something like Backblaze, just to say with the backup thing, there's services like Backblaze that costs, I don't know, $8 a month or something, that backs up your entire computer automatically. And you don't have to worry about it. Even if your computer gets lost or stolen or whatever, you can just get a new one and recover the entire system from Backblaze, and there you are. And it's like not really expensive. And then there's Time Machine and like manual backups, of course. But I have multiple of these things, and I can say, and hopefully that never changes, that in like the 15 years of me doing this, I have never lost a session. Like it's just all there. I had to do a remix this year from a record that has been tracked in 2008, and I could just easily find the sessions, open them up, and do the remix, right? And like
That's a long time.
yeah.
I don't know if I'd say yes to that.
I mean, you can do it because you are in Pro Tools, and that would never work.
Yeah, it would never open. Never open.
but I'm in Cubase, and so I can open an old Cubase session. Just kidding. Okay, so communication, coaching, guidance. Just quickly on that. If you are working with an artist at the studio or yourself, like or a bandmate or something, how you communicate in the session absolutely influences, of course, the results. Did you have any like experiences, like good or bad, there, where someone just messed it up by making the performer uncomfortable, or maybe doing the other way around? Like,
Yeah, definitely. Like I worked with in Canada anyways, a really famous producer, and he showed up 4 hours late, got onto the computer, and then started buying synths on his phone the whole time, just like click and record, letting it roll. And then they'd like stop and be like, let's do it again. And they're like, any thoughts? He's like, no. I was like, what is happening here? So that was the worst case scenario, in my opinion. It was like not being attentive, not monitoring what they needed, which is what they were looking for is guidance or at least assurance. Like at the very least, just agree with them. But giving nothing is just not an option, I think, right? We have to, like part of being a producer or an engineer or even a mixer, even when you're not with the clients, is being a bit of a psychologist and picking up on what they're looking for and what they're hoping to get out of this beyond the product you're providing. Because it's more than that, it's an experience. And you're gonna get more out of them if you do a good job at that. If like Benny does mixing, that's like he mixed like 250 songs this year, which is incredible. But he provides a lot more than that. He gets into like the more that he provides is like how to do it, is quality control. It's, hey, I'll listen to your tracks before I mix them to make sure you didn't screw anything up. And that's a lot of value for these people, and it makes Benny's life way easier.
it does, it definitely does. Warren had a great example yesterday too. We had a talk with Warren Heward at the Studioszene over there. By the way, there's amazing podcast talks going on if you want to check that out. We're going to do one today as well with Moritz Enders, and then tomorrow with Julia. And Warren had a great example where he said that if you, for example, like someone's singing and the entire take is just crap, but at the end there's this one part that was really great where there was a lot of emotion in it. You can either say like, that's the worst thing I've ever heard, or you can say like, you know, that last word, how you did that, like that was super amazing. Like I want more of that, you know, and like the two different ways of saying it, and one will get you way better results, of course, the next time you do it. Okay. What to record first, second, etc. That's one thing where Malcolm and I always disagree on the podcast, basically, because, I mean, there's no right or wrong way to do it. But I personally do, usually, if I do overdubs, I do drums, then guitars, then bass, and whatever the rest is. And then I get vocals in as early as possible to make sure that the vocalist doesn't have to do like the entire record at once at the end. It just helps to switch things up. However, Malcolm, you do?
I do it the right way, which is just bass and then guitar. That's the only difference. But other than that, we're the exact same.
Yeah, that doesn't really matter. Whatever works for you, but just think about whatever, you will have your own reasons for what makes sense, but think about it, what makes sense. And avoid the fatigue that happens when try, if at all possible, try and avoid that everybody has to do the entire record at once and then the next person comes and then the next person. Because like, yeah, it's just hard to track like 10 songs in a row. Give people a break. And also it's a more fun process because you see the songs come to life. Like if you do, like let's say I would do the drums though, because it's just the setup and everything. Once it's set up, you just want to get through it. But then the rest, if you can track rhythm guitars and bass and then do a vocal and then jump to a different song and then back and forth, the songs just come to life earlier and it's more fun and everybody feels like they're making progress. Versus it can take a long time until you're like, finally now these are songs. Like we've listened to drum and bass for 2 weeks now.
Yeah, you don't want to wake the vocalist up on the couch because he's fallen asleep out of boredom and be like, it's your turn, sing 12 songs. It's not going to yield good results.
Yeah, and then the rest of the band will be sitting there and observing him sing 12 songs.
Yeah.
Right? So, and also feel free to just kick people out of the studio or your control room if they don't contribute anything. Like sometimes it's like 1 or 2 people in the room really do something and the rest is just watching funny videos on the phone and like talking crap. And if they're not helping the session, just be like, hey, you can do that somewhere else. But if you're here, you got to contribute. And if not, I don't need you here. That's very important because it can make, especially singers, very insecure if you feel like nobody's really paying attention or, you know. So next and last thing here is that whole process, even if you're doing it yourself, this is important. So if you don't do it yourself, the process could look like this. Again, genius-like visualization. You sit there, edit and consolidate your tracks, have a cup of coffee, then hopefully someone mixes it. You have a coffee while they mix it. And then hopefully at the end, it's this result, right?
Wow.
So, the thing is, even if you do it yourself, make sure you clean up the session, comp and consolidate, pick the right takes, do some editing, be your future self's best friend, export the files, label them correctly, come up with a color coding scheme, all of that, make it easy for yourself. Don't use the same exact session start to finish. I highly recommend separating the tracking, the editing, and the mixing process, and not just work in that messy, big session the entire process. So just do that. It takes extra time and it seems tedious, but it's worth it, really. You gotta mix faster if all you have to deal with are the tracks you really need and not everything else that you have piled up in the recording. So then, communication and having a vision, super important. If you collaborate with a mixer, for example, or even within your band, and you don't tell them what you actually want, you're not gonna get great results. And this is also part of getting it right at the source, is like, what did you actually want to create, and are you bold enough and willing to commit that? Like, if you just program MIDI drums and track DI guitars and you don't even choose the samples and you don't choose an amp sound and you give that to a mixer, like, what should they do with that? They don't know what that is supposed to be. You could do all kinds of things. So just make creative decisions, put your producer hat on, communicate that, what the vision is, and even within the band, be clear what the outcome's supposed to be, and you're gonna make your life easier. The question at the end of the day is, can a stranger open this and immediately get to work, even if you mix yourself? And the answer is oftentimes no. Like, I got so many sessions where, like, I open a folder and I'm like, I don't have a clue what that's supposed to be. And you don't want to be that yourself, because you think you'd remember when you export your tracks and they're all called audio 1.7.8 final or whatever. You won't remember 4 weeks later. So just label them correctly, make it easy for yourself, and you're gonna have a better time. So Malcolm, anything you want to add to this? I know we're rushing through this quickly, but
Keep moving.
yeah. No, this is it.
Well, I think what I want to draw attention to is under everybody's butts, there's little business cards from Benny and the self-recording band. And on there, so one of the big problems that we do find a lot of people have is they don't really know, like what we just said is, get it right at the source, have good source tracks. But if you don't know what good source tracks are, that's a problem, right? Maybe you don't know what a bottom snare mic is meant to sound like, because they sound pretty weird on their own, right? So Benny has a resource called Stand-Up Mixes, where he does like a kind of start to finish fader mix with some really great multi-tracks. And it's like a great way to kind of hear what tracks sound like before they're mixed. So that's just a resource I'd highly recommend you check out. And yeah, I think we got to wrap it up. But if anybody has any questions, please come up to us after. We'd love to chat with you all.
Thank you for showing up. And I hope that this was valuable for you, that you picked up some nuggets, some things you haven't heard of maybe, or that will help you next time. And even if you have heard all of it, sometimes we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. And I hope you got value from this, and I thank you very much for your attention and for coming to this talk.
Yeah,
thanks.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. We'll be doing the Studio Sofa more vendors at 2 p.m. right over on the other side of this wall. Come hang out.